One of the things I think we should acknowledge is that most people are forced to live inside someone else's imagination. We are given scripts upon birth and we play them out. And it's not only sort of in terms of Ethiopian education, but so many aspects of education where it becomes synonymous with success. It becomes synonymous with intelligence to think in a certain way. And then you lose all of these other forms of intelligence and know-how. Because that's what education is. You're not just learning facts. You're learning an entire worldview.
As you start your research, a lot of it comes down to, letting go of like some of your expectations and how things were done before. Because this is something, you're all doing something that you've never done before, and the program itself is something that's never been done before. And so that's also part of the reason why you're gonna find all the innovations in it, is because you're going to be charting your own way, and a lot of that really comes down to permission. And my project really doesn't fit any program or any sort of discipline that already exists. It really was bridging way too many departments, and so I had to have a lot of mental permission to do that. But I was making people nervous, but I wasn't making Jonathan nervous. Those who are really into the idea of a discipline or something, they were very uncomfortable with it. But when they see the result, they were like, oh wow, this, it talks for itself.
You have to see it.
You have to
speak for itself,
It speaks for itself,
To escape the colonization of Aristotle on the Western mind, to expect exposition, climax, conclusion, and for our ability to utilize creativity to escape that colonization of the mind. And so your question is essentially asking us to recognize the answer is to engage creativity.
Throughout my career as a surgeon, I think learned more about surgery when I start thinking about other things. You kind of do the same things over and over again. You get ingrained in a way of thinking, and you need to think about something totally different to get new ideas and kind of fresh perspective on what you're doing every day. This surgery was done via open surgery. Now the way the surgery is done laparoscopically is the surgeon inserts a camera, so they're seeing the inside of the patient on a screen that's two-dimensional, obviously, whereas before they were putting their hands inside the patient and feeling and seeing the anatomy in 3 dimensions. The way we interact with this sculpture is there's a figure, it occupies space, we can walk around it, but when you transfer that to painting, it has some three-dimensionality to it, but it's a flat surface essentially. The artist has to do things or account for the creation of space in a two-dimensional surface in a way that's kind of just there or automatic with a sculpture.
I personally found the surgeon's one to be incredibly useful in just because I'm struggling right now with like how much of this concept do I have to explain before getting to the next thing that kind of uses it. And his sort of breath with like, this is what this surgery is, and this is how it works, and now I'm going to just talk about, like, that was very useful to see, like, the framing that you can kind of move on with that. And I was a little lost with I don't know anything about music, and I don't speak German, so I was a little bit lost in that one, but that was also good to see that it's, like, acceptable to have the important words in there, even if you have to then go back and kind of explain a little bit.
According to one witness who visited Beethoven at this time in 1824, the composer described his gaze upward, or Blick nach oben, as a spiritual quest that freed his imagination, overcoming constraints of time and space in a creative epiphany.
And to be radically open, I keep thinking about that example that David B. and Cooley showed us of the Beatles with that photograph.
Yeah,
It was like they were so open to the idea of something new that they didn't expect, maybe being the answer to the problem.
The Beatles were always open to the excitement of happy accidents and seeing that as creativity. Robert Freeman, the photographer, going to their place and projecting slides from their photo shoot for their upcoming album, Rubber Soul. And so this is the image that he projects to them across the room on a piece of clear cardboard. The cardboard falls open. The image is still on there. Paul, this time, says, "Can you print it like that?" And that becomes the Rubber Soul album, which also was the first album, the first Beatles album, and maybe the first album, where the group's name is not on there.
Oh, one thing you haven't seen yet is in the end of your second year, my guess is that every one of you will have this moment of crisis where you think that it's completely falling apart, you have no idea where this is going, and it's going to fail, and you won't get your degree, which is
I'm
not...
already there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, are we ahead? Are we ahead, or do we just have extra? We have extra.
So, and it always happens, and that's an incredibly valuable moment, because it's a moment where you also... it's hard, but you also rethink a lot of things. Eugene is one of the best examples of this because he wanted to do something that was completely against the rules for psychotherapy. You never take a patient out of the consulting room.
As a kid, I hated school, and I grew up on the west coast of Ireland, so I used to just bunk off and run around the woods, and actually it was the best education I had. So putting all those things together, when I became a psychotherapist, I thought, actually, we don't need to do all of this in the room. We can kind of go up the mountain and learn from Mother Nature. What I became very aware of through my research is that there is a lost language of the senses. The world we create around us is visual and auditory. It's designed with sight and sound in mind. But now there's a revolution. And we're beginning to see really breakthrough studies in interoception and the relationship between interoception and mental health. The state that we can experience in nature is an embodied state of consciousness.
I put a guy who'd been living with shamans in Africa for 10 years on his committee, an anthropologist, a philosopher of nature who's somebody he'd been reading a lot about, and I thought, well, that's a really good person for him. And then I also put a very traditional psychoanalyst on the committee, somebody who I'd heard him present cases. I knew this guy was a very good therapist. He was, but traditional. He was a training analyst, and I knew that he was going to have trouble with Eugene, and that Eugene was going to have trouble with him. I get this call from London, and Eugene says, I can't work with this guy anymore, I'm going to fail this. And I said, I want you to go back to the guy, ask him what he thinks you should do, and see if you can do it.
Okay.
So I didn't hear from him for a month. A month later, I get a call from him, and he said, this is fantastic, this is really working out. The psychoanalyst came to his graduation 2 months later and said to me, this has changed my practice.
Joseph Campbell said, something like, it's not meaning that we seek, really. It's to feel the experience, the rapture of being alive. And I think attunement states give you that. Having an experience of non-judgment, by developing a relationship with nature. That is a profoundly important experience to us as human beings. It's reassuring, it's empowering, it's enlivening.
We've landed at this place that says, utilize abandon, use your own language. You have permission to communicate your idea with your own language, because that's what we are discovering is the most compelling part of everything we've experienced the past couple of days.
Well, do you remember the very beginning of this program when you all first applied? What was the first thing I asked you to do?
To find what really mattered to us.
You got to find yourself in your project. And you have to have faith that if you find yourself and you articulate it well enough,
yeah,
I'm going to be interested.